Let's see. Does anybody need captions? Okay. Um, I want to, as I put this into full screen mode, I'm going to show just for folks, because this is fun, that Google Slides has a caption function. And I use it like when I present sometimes, and I have it set up so the captions are at the top of the screen. And it's just the Google API, so it's captioning, but it's kind of a neat feature for Google Slides if you're thinking about doing one format versus another when you're doing a talk. It just adds a little bit of a level of accessibility, but I will turn it off since we talked about no one needing them. We introduced ourselves. I'm Amy Jin. We're everyone, right? And for the video, the reason I love giving these workshops is because everyone can give back to Drupal. All skill levels, all job levels, just having a passion for giving back and moving the project forward. It's really important to lower those barriers to entry for everybody. So we're going to talk about why we contribute. What are some of the reasons? What are some of the benefits of contributing? Because there's lots of smaller benefits that we don't always think about when we contribute back to open source projects. We'll talk about different types of contributions because that goes along with the lowering the barriers to entry. There's not just code contributions. There's documentation. There's all kinds of different things. I'll give some helpful tips and tricks on where to start contributing and how to. And we'll go through the issue queue step by step and kind of do a 101. And we'll talk a little bit about tooling and documentation. Tooling is not in my wheelhouse necessarily, so that's why Randy comes in and helps me out because everyone has their strengths and it's not my strength, so that's one of Randy. So he's going to be back later this afternoon to help with the tooling and documentation. And then I'll go through a demo of the patching process. So I cannot iterate this enough. You can still contribute back to Drupal without any coding skills and without ever having to make a patch. You can be a huge asset to the project without even having a local instance on your machine. You do not have to have a local environment to give back to Drupal. So why do we contribute? If you depend on open source depends on you. That's just the way it is, not to make people feel guilty, but we download the software for free. We use it for free. And the only way the coders know how their software is being used is when we help them with that, when we give them our bugs, when we tell them, our feature requests, what we need for support. So as the project grows, it depends on us to give back that valuable information. Your contributions are valued. Again, it goes back to the people who make the product don't always know how we use it. We use it in so many different ways. And so when we give back, they understand that and they can add those feature requests. They can make integrations. They can move forward with the rest of the open source community. As people start using Composer, we kind of catch up with the rest of the world. So giving back just by even like submitting our bugs is tremendously valuable. And then because you give back your feature requests and you give back the bugs, it gives back to us because those people work on those bugs and on those issues. And then it creates the software how we use it. So it really defines sort of the roadmap of the project the more we give back. And of course, contributing makes you feel more integrated and part of the Drupal community. It's another way to feel included in the Drupal community. Like I was saying before, if you're a project manager, or you're human resources, or your sales, sometimes you don't always have a reason to go to a conference that's like highly tech-centric. But if there's a contribution day and you understand how to contribute, you can go and you can be a part of that ecosystem as well. So this one's a tricky one. I don't have to tell you folks why to give back to Drupal, but how do you convince your boss or your agency or your institution to give back? This is the tricky part. How do you convince the stakeholders that it's a good idea? Drupal depends on sharing. And it goes back to companies that are consuming Drupal for free should certainly give back. They appreciate the value of helping each other and appreciating others. In the tech industry, it can be seen as good corporate citizenship. You know, many of the Drupal agencies that have this already a part of their system, they have it built into the employee benefits. You know, they'll have like an 80-20 thing where you have 80% billables and 20%, and that 20% you can use in different ways. And many of the ways that ideas that they give to their employees is to give back to their open source projects. So it's good for talent recruitment. A lot of agencies, when they advertise this on their benefits page, when it's important for people looking for a job to give back to Drupal and have that be a part of their work cycle, you know, they're going to look to those shops that offer it in their benefits, because giving back to Drupal can be a privilege for some folks. I know parents, working 40 hours a week is enough, and to have to give back to Drupal on your time off, that's a privilege. And so when it's built into that work atmosphere, it makes it a lot easier for folks. And people love going to events, right? We love seeing our Drupal friends. We love the professional development. It's fun and rewarding to work closely with who you might admire. You know, the smartest people in the Drupal community are usually at these events. And simply put, to those agencies, the more you give back, the more you get. And it's definitely reflected in your employee retention. So some of the benefits of contributing: it makes you feel good, right? You know, it feels good when you see a piece of your code go into a project that 5% of the internet uses. You know, if you think about those numbers, that's millions of websites that have a little piece of you in there. So contributing makes you feel good. It also moves that Drupal project closer to perfection, especially when you're submitting feature requests or you're part of the initiative building and you're help planning those roadmaps. Drupal becomes more of how you want to use it. And fixing Drupal on the client side helps move the project closer, because when people evaluate Drupal, when they see that the client facing stuff, all of that stuff is super important, not just the code, but the styling of Drupal, the grammar and documentation, all of that builds a better product. Giving back to Drupal builds your Drupal street cred. It helps build your resume, because people who give back to Drupal can usually be okay with others reviewing their code and can accept feedback, because it's much like working on a project with a few people. Creating those issues and forks, parallel working on tickets and creating those branches. It shows that you have a willingness to learn and be able to accept that feedback. So that goes a long way when people look at your Drupal.org profile. And then the more you contribute, the more you learn. Like I always say, I'm a non-coder, but the more issues I go into and I work on, you know, the more pieces of the code I understand. So the more issues and the more different types of things really helps build my career, as far as of learning. You know, when I'm sitting with my developers at work, when they say some words, now I understand them, right? So the more you contribute, the more you learn. So there's all different types of contributions. There's external documentation guides, translations, sharing your knowledge, writing themes and modules, promoting the platform, this is a big one, because without promoting the platform, other types of open source CMSs sort of replace it. So promoting the platform is just as important as writing the code. And then, of course, the issue queue. So I want to talk about documentation a little bit. And I know when we're beginners, we're always told, start with documentation. And I know the first thing I thought of when someone told me that was, how can I contribute to documentation if I don't know what I'm doing, right? But it makes you the perfect person to help with the docs, because if you as a beginner can't understand the docs, there's something wrong there. A beginner should be able to open up some of those docs and understand from the beginning. So as a beginner, it's super important to give your feedback. There's official guides to Drupal. And I'll go over a few of the official guides. There's the Drupal user guides. These official guides are governed by maintainers, and they're held to an established standard through an editorial process. So these official guides have a little bit different process to giving back to than like your module guides and things like that. But they're super important for the project. There's the Drupal user guide, which is written for people with that minimal knowledge of the Drupal CMS. So this guide is really aimed to folks who have some experience with the current or past version, but want to expand their skills. So this is a great place to start if you've been in Drupal for a little while, and want to contribute back to like maybe some of the gotchas you found in the documentation. There's the evaluator guide. What this does is it helps people like quickly spin up a demo and build an application on their local machine. And what this guide does is it provides the instructions for how to create that demo and how to use Drupal on your local machine. So this is a good place, if you don't have a local environment and you're trying to spin one up, you can contribute to this guide, because the step-by-step instructions should be able to be really straightforward and follow. And so you can contribute back by adding some notes, like if there was a step that was skipped. And then there's the local development guide. This is about how to create and install a Drupal application on your machine for the purpose of development. So this is really to assist in creating the applications for the local machine. And again, this should be able to follow. It should provide a starting point for a website, and its intended audience is a developer. So this is a more advanced guide, but still, if you can't follow it and you've been, doing Drupal for a while, it's a great place to add some of your notes. Community guides. Community documentation is a little bit different because anyone can edit this. You can go in there, there's an edit link on the page, and really any member of the Drupal community who has a Drupal.org profile can submit to a community guide without going through that same editorial process for the official guides. It's not subject to that really tight, informal editorial process. And this, I'm going to do a demo on how to contribute to to one of these community guides after the slides. So there's Drupal guides. It's sort of the catch-all for Drupal 8, 9, and later. If you want documentation for 7 and 6, it is there archived. You just have to like dig around a little bit further for it. But really, since those are antiquated, that might not be a good use of your time to participate in guides earlier than Drupal 7. Drupal 7 is going to be around for a little bit longer, so I do think that Drupal 7 is worth contributing to, but Drupal 6 and Drupal 5, maybe not so much. There's the developer guide in the community queue, which really is for the developers, and it talks about the tools and the processes and the standards. And this isn't tied to any specific Drupal version, it's just as a whole. There's the Drupal API guide. An API stands for Application Programming Interface. And if I'm wrong with that, someone can correct me. It's it's the guide that provides sort of the general overview of all of the core APIs. This is helpful for me as a non-programmer understand where information is being pulled from. And then there's Drupal.org documentation. And really these are the various guides and guidelines for using Drupal.org. So there's all different things to contribute to here. There's user accounts where it talks about user roles and permissions, instructions on how to become a confirmed user, how to set up two-factor authentication, how to delete your account. So that's the user accounts. Content guidelines. So these are case studies, Drupal Planet, other content guidelines like front page promotion instructions, things like that. There's marketplace guidelines. This documentation describes sections of the marketplace and how to get listed in them. Moderation and maintenance, it's for the content moderators, webmasters, and others who have more advanced roles who maintain Drupal.org. And the process to get an advanced role isn't very cumbersome, but if it's something you want, you simply ask for it and they set you up with two-factor authentication. So don't be dissuaded if you need extended privileges for something. Most of the time, all you have to do is ask for them. Building Drupal.org, this is documentation for those fixing bugs and developing new features on Drupal. There's Drupal CI, which is documentation for the automated testing infrastructure. There are RSS feeds. They're available on Drupal.org, and you can find useful tips on how to track your topics and staying up to date. Drupal Camp site archives. This is nice because you can see sort of the history and longevity of a Drupal camp. Say you've never been there before, but you want to see maybe who the past speakers were, who the past organizers were, what they did for social events. And most of these sites are archived on Drupal.org as well. There's the API guide. It's, the data they provide and how to use them. And there's the GitLab integration documentation. It's information about Drupal.org's integration with the GitLab code and contribution toolset. And I'm going to talk a little bit about GitLab at the end because we're going to talk about patching today and documentation, but I know kind of on the back of everyone's mind, patching is being antiquated and we're going to a more pull request type workflow. But we're not there yet. We're still evaluating how that's going to work. So I'm going to talk briefly about that. So although I am going to be doing patching, we're still going to have that on Drupal.org for a while longer. So don't feel like this information will be antiquated anytime soon. So Drupal.org content. This is a place for book listings, case studies, front page promotion. And did I already go? Oh, I went through some of these. Hosting, organization profiles, Planet Drupal, regionalized Planet Drupal, which is like translations and things like that, service listings, training listings, and really content moderators. They basically moderate and make sure there's not spam. And that's a great way to get started with Drupal too, is being a content moderator, sort of going through the case studies, making sure there's no self-promotion, going through organization profiles, making sure they're not too spammy, things like that. If you have a real eye for detail, being a content moderator is a good place to start. Translations, if you know a different language, there's always a need for contributions and translations. Some have only incomplete versions of text and core. For the interfaces, most of them will show up in English. So while some of them are translated, they may need corrections and improvements of the language. And no language, except for English, as far as I know, has a complete set of translations for all of the contributed modules. So you have a second language, and it's important to you to lower the barriers to entry, and when your home country or your ancestral country, giving back in the form of translations and localizations is super important. Sharing your knowledge is a great way to give back to Drupal. You know something cool, share it at a local camp or meetup. And you will always know something that someone else doesn't know. Even if it's a 5-minute lightning talk, someone else in that room might not know that. So speaking and training, becoming a role model for others. You can use this for resume building. You can be seen as like a subject matter expert in your field. And public speaking builds your self-confidence, empowers you a little bit more. And I don't know about you folks, but I like to submit new talks. And sometimes I don't know all the information for that talk. So creating a talk is a great way to learn the subject matter too, because there's nothing like getting in front of someone and you don't know what you're talking about. So I've used this as professional development as well. Like I'm giving a talk on Get in a couple weeks where I have like rudimentary knowledge of Get, but now I'm giving a talk. So guess what? I have to know a little bit more. So that it's like this rewarding feeling of accomplishment, right? And really, if you belong to a marginalized or underrepresented community, speaking and training at a camp or conference or meetup is a great way to be a role model and get more people who look like you or think like you to be a part of the community. Having a person looking at a page on a camp and not seeing anyone that reflects you can be concerning, so think about that. You don't see a lot of women speakers. Make that leap and be a woman speaker at that camp. And there's meetups. This is a great smaller place. It's less formal. You can do some lightning talks. You can collaborate with others. After you do some meetups, maybe you move on to Drupal camps, which are local and regional events where you have an audience of a little bit larger, say 50 people, and you get accepted to a Drupal camp. A great place to talk first is at that meetup, and then of course moving on to DrupalCon in our more global events. So what can you talk about? And I'm not going to go through all these. There's all different ways and all different types of talks you can give, from case studies to panels to lightning talks, even talking about what you want to learn next. And people love story-based talks about how you learned something, how you moved careers. And that's what a case study is, right? It's a story-based talk. So even if you think like maybe you don't have that technical background, you can weave it into a story to make yourself more comfortable on stage. There's giving back to Drupal by extending it, distributions, themes, and modules. We can all pick and choose from a wide array of contributed modules to add functionality to our sites. And that's what the contributed modules and themes do, right? The distributions provide the features and the specific, like a single download type thing containing core software with contributed modules and predefined configurations, where themes are more about the looks and define the feel and the visual look of your site. And a contributed module, is the PHP or JavaScript or CSS that extends the site features and adds functionality. So those are all ways you can get back to Drupal as well. But what we really like is the issue queue, right? So I'm going to give sort of this like general overview, like this quick look at the issue queue. Then we'll take a break and then we'll work in the issue queue. But the issue queue, and we'll look at what it looks like too after a break. It's our ticketing system for Drupal, right? It's our Jira board, it's our Kanban board. It's that centralized place for reporting an issue, updating an issue, triaging issues, writing patches, providing feedback, and testing. So those are all the different things that you can do in the issue queue. And like I said, it looks very much like a workflow, right? Someone's reporting a bug. Someone goes in there and validates the instructions. Someone might have some steps to reproduce. Someone writes the feedback, and then someone QAs it. So When you look at it much like you work at your workflow tickets, it doesn't seem as daunting. If people don't report the bugs and make notes on how to reproduce them or on how to reproduce similar behaviors, our Drupal engineers don't know how the software is being used. It goes back to like providing our feedback. And the client-facing errors and bugs are just as important as code. And I cannot stress this enough, because making sure the project looks good to future clients and users ensures the longevity of our project. You know, some folks are like, well, it's just a typo or it's just a grammar fix. But people who are not familiar with Drupal and they open up the project and they see a page littered with typos, it doesn't add much validation to our project. So all of the errors are worth reporting. UI errors, documentation, accessibility, and bugs. And again, you don't have to know how to fix it to report it. So when we find an issue, we want to make sure that the issue doesn't already exist, because we don't want to be redundant. If the issue does exist, we want to make sure that the issue is up to date. You know, you want to report any similar findings, add steps to replicate. Maybe you have a module installed that the other person didn't, and so your steps to replicate are a little bit different. And then add steps to validate too. How do we know that that bug is fixed? So as a novice to the issue queue, you can be working in Drupal for 10 years and never been a part of the issue queue, and that's okay. You can be a novice and be working in Drupal for 10 years. So you just want to start small and work your way up. So maybe starting with triage, you know, looking at issues in the queue and making sure that they're still relevant. Is it a Drupal 5 issue? We might want to just like, you know, say that that's too old and get that out of the queue. Tagging issues. This is a great way for folks to find the issues that they want to work on. So if you're going through and doing some triage and you look and you see that it's an accessibility issue, you can tag it accessibility, and that way folks who are passionate about accessibility or have that be one of, you know, something they work on professionally, they can easily find it in the issue queue just by a tag. You can test and review code. You can apply the patches, and you can re-roll patches. You know, after new versions of Drupal or modules are updated, you can rewrite that patch to make sure that it can still apply with the current version. So there are lots of issues to choose from. So there's a picture here of the side of the Drupal core project page. And you can see that there's a search box, but there's also this advanced search link right here. And this is really valuable because when you click this, it opens up this interface, which is really easy to use. It opens up a couple of more fields for you to refine your search. You can search for a topic. Say you're working with someone, but you can't remember what the issue was. You can search by who it's assigned to, by who it's submitted by, or even by who it's followed by, because you have the option of starring an issue. So you're working with someone on a contrib day and you know their Drupal.org name, you can search it through there. Say you're not ready to write a patch, but you're ready to review a patch, you can search by the status. You can search by priority or category. What version of Drupal are you more comfortable with? Are you a Drupal 7 developer and want to work more on Drupal 7 right now? You can refine that search even further. So the issue queue is very big. And as a beginner, I know I was overwhelmed by the issue queue. Even after I did that advanced search and refined what I wanted to work on, I like to suggest some issues to steer clear of. One being an issue or stay away from contributed projects that aren't actively maintained. And this goes back to like working on Drupal 6 or Drupal 5 as well. They're not actively maintained. So you can see here that this project hasn't had a release since 2014. So it might not be a good project for a beginner to work on unless you're actively using that project in something and you want to report a bug. But but know that if a project isn't actively maintained, the patch most likely will not be included. You know, it won't be updated or anything like that. But on the flip side of that, if you have a patch and you know how to fix it, it might help someone else. So it may never be committed, but that patch is up there for someone else. So there's sort of like two sides to that coin. I like to tell folks to stay away from projects that have hundreds of open issues, except if they're highly used modules, like the meta tag module has hundreds of issues, but it's a module that like is used by almost everyone, right? But say it's a less, you know, a module that isn't as used, if it has 200 open issues, or if there's issues in there that says the maintainer won't fix them or they're just not interested, I would just stay away from those as beginners. And try not to get down on ourselves, right? We know that it might take a couple of iterations to get our code the way the maintainers want. So just be mindful of maintainers are busy. Sometimes they don't have backup. So as a beginner, like I said, these are sort of just issues or projects to steer clear of. You know, this is a view of the issue queue, and you can kind of see like how old, when the issue first started, like this was, you know, started about a year ago, but it was last worked on a day ago. So that might be something you want to gauge on if it's an actively worked on issue. You know, and this is that view that you can see the information in a little different way. And I do recommend steering away from issues where there's disagreements in the queue from maintainers or developers. If the issue keeps getting discussed back and forth and there's arguments about how to move forward, as a beginner, you might want to pass on that because it's not going to get resolved anytime soon. So I kind of went over this a little bit, but you know, our anatomy of when we create an issue, and there's a picture of it on the next screen, but we want to provide good metadata for our issue. We want to make sure that the title is descriptive yet concise, and not aggressive or accusatory. Basically, you want the next person who has the issue to be able to find it in the queue with an easy search. So making sure you have just a short, concise title is really important. The category, is it a bug? Is it a feature request? You know, is it for support? Priority is important. You know, is it making a white screen of death? So that's a high priority. But if it's just a typo, maybe that's a little bit of a minor priority or normal. The status when you first create an issue is going to be active, but as you work on an issue, you change the status. You know, there's active if you're actively working on it, needs work if maybe someone's worked on it before, but there's still a bug. RTBC is reviewed and tested by the community, meaning that someone has tested it and feels that it's good to go. And then there's fixed, which means it's committed or decided not to be committed to core. Specifying which version of the project you're working on, because maybe the bug isn't in the current release, like say you're on 2.2, you know, that's where the module is, but your bug is in 2.1. People are still using 2.1, so just indicate what version. The component varies from project to project, what's in the interface, but you know, it could be UI, it could be documentation, code, modules. And then providing a good summary. There's a template now that's injected into the when you create an issue, and we'll look at that later. But here's that metadata in a picture. You can see some of it's pre-populated. You just hit create new issue in a project and it already populates, you know, the project, but you have to select the rest. So that's sort of what creating an issue looks like. So I talk about Dreditor, which is an extension for Chrome, and it's not actively maintained, so there's some bugs. And there's a couple of like super handy features that it had, and one of them was inserting the summary template. But now Drupal.org has that for you. So it's not a feature of Dreditor anymore. But in that issue summary, it injects, reminders of what you should put in your ticket. Some of them aren't necessary on some of the minor fixes, and I don't use all of them, but it's a good reminder of what to look for and what to report. Because remember, failure to give context, like URLs and breadcrumbs and steps to replicate, can prevent and like sort of clog that issue. So, making sure that you have all of those things in line to begin with is super handy. Here's my obligatory science fiction reference. Tooling and documentation. Slack, we're pretty familiar with Slack. Drupal Slack is a great place to start. There's all kinds of good channels. You can join, contribute. And then whatever specialty you might want, there's a channel for almost everything in Drupal Slack. Drush is a handy tool to have. It's specific instructions for installing. If you go to the node indicated on the page, it's specific instructions for installing Drush. Composer is a dependency manager for PHP, super important. They're not must-haves, but they're definitely useful tools. Having a text editor or an IDE is important. I do not think an IDE is important for everyone because there's definitely a learning curve. It's more integrated, it might have a command line tool in it. It might have some like a GUI for your get commands and stuff like that. But it's okay to have a bare bones editor like BB Edit or Sublime or, but feel free to have PHP Storm or Atom or any of those. Simply Test Me is an online service that provides an on-demand sandbox for evaluating projects, themes, and distributions. Super helpful. Just if you want to see how a module works, you can spin up a Simply Test Me site, and I'll spin one up in a little bit. You can test most modules within this remote version of Drupal, and you can test patches by using the advanced option function. You can add different modules and things like that. The login details for accessing Simply Test Me are pretty easy. It's admin, admin, admin for everything. So it sort of lowers the barrier to entry. Dreditor is that online tool I talked about that adds some functionality and creates a little bit different user experience for people in the issue queue. Unfortunately, the status is cloudy with a chance of deprecation, but it still works. And I'll show you the difference between having Dreditor installed and not having Dreditor. It adds a couple of buttons in the issue queue, which are super handy for code review. And then I have some useful links. So you know how to fix the problem. And I'm pretty much just summing this up just to show that there aren't that many steps involved. So to write a patch, there's only a few steps. You download a repository onto your machine, you create a new branch, you make changes, you compare the branches with a diff, then you create a patch with that diff, and then you upload the patch and write a comment. So there's only 5 steps to creating a patch. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's pretty straightforward. So you're not ready to make a patch, but you want to review. Again, the steps are pretty easy to review a patch. You don't have to know code to contribute back to Drupal and to test a patch. You can do it in a couple different ways. You can use Simply Test Me to test the patch, and you can test the patch locally in your Get repository. After you've tested the patch, you can provide useful information and screenshots, and then you update the status. So, of course, I wouldn't recommend reviewing a code patch when you're not a coder, but something, like an accessibility or functionality or UI or documentation, you can certainly be able to participate in reviewing a fix. So the Dreditor, these are the buttons that injects in the issue queue for you. There's a Simply Test Me button. You you select the Simply Test Me button and it spawns a Simply Test Me instance with the information already, it puts the information already in the interface for you, what specific module you're using, what version, and it attaches the patches URL. So it's just this sort of quick way to spin it up real quick. And then there's a review button that will open up the patch in a diff file with color-coded lines and add some added functionality. You can see the picture on the side here is what, when you click that review button, it opens this up. And when you're ready to review the code, if you select a line of the code, this code comment box will open, which is super nice. So you can type in your comments, hit save, select another line of code, write some comments, hit save, and then paste. And what you've pasted, what you've typed in this window will paste into the next comment in the issue queue. So it makes inserting code comments really easy. So we're going to do a demo. So again, I'm going to just iterate the process. We're going to find a problem, which I've already found for the sake of ease. We're going to file an issue. We're going to download the repository onto our machine. We're going to create a new branch. We're going to make changes to the branch, compare the branches, create a patch with the diff between the two branches, and then we're going to upload that patch to Drupal.org. And then we're going to review it. Know that you shouldn't review your own patch. I will go through the process but not hit the buttons because it's never a good idea to review your own code, right? But the review process is, again, finding the issue, reviewing the file that's been submitted. If you're going to apply the patch locally, you download the repository on your machine, you download the patch, you apply the patch, you review the UI or the code or whatever it is, and then you provide useful feedback. And that's it. And then I can talk about GitLab later, but this is a really good place for a break before the demo process. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if I can find the button. And then let's take like, it's 7:57, so 8. So let's take like a I don't know, like a 10-minute break and like get some coffee, get some water, use the bathroom, things like that, and come back and we'll go through that patching process because it's good to like sort of absorb the information and then come back with a fresh brain. Does that sound good to everyone? I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes.
So